The jungle of Zoryn was a living, breathing nightmare. Its dense foliage swallowed everything: sound, light, and hope. But Kora had learned long ago how to survive here, to read the language of the leaves, the hum of the air, and the shifting shadows. This was her home, and she knew its dangers better than any alien. She crouched low in the underbrush, sweat dripping down her forehead, her breath steady but rapid. The enemy convoy was close now, just beyond the thick layer of ferns. A squadron of Xanthe soldiers moved in formation, their dark armor blending with the shadows. They were too confident, too sure of their superiority. That was their first mistake. Kora smiled grimly, her fingers tightening around the trigger of her pulse rifle. Her team was in position, 2 rebels, hidden in the trees, their crosshairs locked on the soldiers ahead. She had trained them well. Today, they would strike at the heart of the Xanthe's arrogance. She turned her head slightly, signaling the countdown. A low whistle escaped her lips, a sound that carried no more than a few meters. The others heard it, understood it. They moved with the silence of ghosts. The trap was set. Kora pressed herself further into the foliage, her pulse thudding in her ears, the weight of the moment heavy in her chest. The Xanthe were still unaware. They were walking straight into her web, and they would not see the threads until it was too late. With a sharp nod, Kora gave the signal. Explosions ripped through the silence, the deafening crack of C4 charges splitting the air. The first soldier went down, the blast obliterating his body in an instant. The others stumbled, disoriented. Kora's rebels opened fire. It was chaos, but the kind she had come to master. The Xanthe soldiers scrambled, trying to regroup, but Kora's team was already on them, moving fast, using the jungle to their advantage. The aliens were out of their element. They were used to sleek, clean battles on sterile planets, where technology and strategy could ensure victory. They had underestimated the savagery of the Deathworld. "Push forward!" Kora shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She was already moving, weaving between trees, staying low, her rifle raised. She was the spearhead of this assault, the one who would make sure every Xanthe soldier paid for their invasion of her home. A burst of fire whizzed past her, and Kora ducked, firing back with precision. The soldier fell, but Kora didn't stop. She never stopped. The sound of gunfire was deafening, but Kora focused only on the target ahead, the commander, a towering figure in the back, barking orders at the remaining troops. He was well protected, encased in heavy armor that would take more than a standard pull shot to breach. "On me!" Kora barked, and 2 rebels flanked her, moving swiftly through the undergrowth. The commander was distracted, and that would be his undoing. As Kora emerged from the shadows, she caught sight of him and aimed. But the shot never came. A flash of light exploded to her right, and the ground beneath her feet buckled. The blast sent her tumbling through the air, her body slamming into the ground. Pain exploded in her side, but she barely felt it. The world spun around her, and she struggled to rise, forcing herself to focus on the battle. She could see her rebels scattered, scrambling for cover. The Xanthe were regrouping, and they had brought reinforcements. They'd set a trap of their own. "Fall back!" Kora ordered through gritted teeth, forcing herself to stand. She fired a few shots, creating cover fire for her team. "We can't win this one. Get to the fallback point." But her rebels hesitated, their eyes on her. They were loyal, they trusted her. But they were scared. They had underestimated the Xanthe too. Kora could see it in their faces. "We stand and fight," one of the rebels shouted, his voice filled with defiance. His eyes were wide, his grip on his rifle trembling. "No," Kora said, her voice cold and steady. "This isn't about heroics. This is about survival." She fired another round into the advancing Xanthe, taking down a soldier before turning to face her team. "Now move. We leave no one behind, but we live to fight another day." They knew better than to argue. One by one, they began to retreat, fading back into the jungle, their movements swift and deliberate. Kora kept them moving, guiding them with her sharp, tactical mind. She had planned this attack carefully, And now, she would pull them out, just as she always had. As the last of her rebels disappeared into the dense foliage, Kora turned back to face the battlefield one last time. She was alone now, the distant sounds of the Xanthe closing in. The commander and his reinforcements would not follow her. Not yet. They were too focused on the destruction of her team. Kora took one last shot, catching the commander off guard, and then she turned and disappeared into the jungle, her heart pounding in her chest. The mission had been a failure, but it had served its purpose. The Xanthe would know now that humanity was not something they could crush underfoot. The human spirit was far too strong. As she moved through the darkened jungle, Kora's mind raced. She could already hear Varric's voice in her head, taunting her with threats of retaliation. She knew what this meant: retaliation would come, but so would their fear. This was only the beginning. Kora's rebels had failed, but she knew one thing: today's lesson was one they would never forget. They had learned what it meant to face a foe that fought back, not with the weapons of technology, but with the raw, untamed force of survival. And when the Xanthe came for them again, they would be ready. The jungle was her ally, and she would teach the invaders to fear it. To fear her. And in that fear, they would learn the true strength of humanity. The jungle was alive with its usual hum. The rhythmic buzzing of insects, the low rustle of branches swaying in the wind, the distant cries of predatory beasts. But to Kora, the sounds were no longer comforting. They had become a constant reminder of the fragile line she walked. It wasn't just the jungle that was dangerous now, it was the Xanthe, and they were closing in faster than she had anticipated. Kora sat cross-legged on the forest floor, her back to a large tree, her pulse rifle cradled in her lap. Her team was spread out around her, some resting, others sharpening their weapons, but all with the same look in their eyes, the quiet understanding that their victory had been hollow. The Xanthe had survived, and now the real war would begin. "How many do we have left?" Kora asked, her voice low, measured. Her second-in-command, Zoryn, was crouched beside her, studying a map. His face was grim, the lines of stress and exhaustion pulling at the corners of his mouth. 25, he replied. And that's with a few injuries. He paused, glancing at the rest of the team. But we've got the best we could ask for. We'll hold our ground. Kora nodded, though the weight of their situation was heavier than she let on. She knew their chances were slim. The Xanthe were relentless, and now that they had seen how much the humans could fight back, they would come with everything. But they were still here. She wasn't ready to give up. "Tonight, we strike again," Kora said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Zoryn opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off with a sharp look. "We need to show them we can make them bleed." The forest was quiet as Zoryn processed her words. He knew her. Kora had never been one to retreat for long. Her desire for victory, her need to push forward, was what kept them alive this long. But he could see the toll it was taking on her. Her eyes were too sharp, too focused. There was no time for grief. Not yet. "I'll prepare the men," Zoryn said, his voice respectful, though laced with concern. "But we need to think this through. The Xanthe will come harder now." Kora stood, brushing dirt from her clothes. "We've been fighting for survival this whole time. Now it's time to fight for our future." Her words weren't just for Zoryn, they were for herself, too. It was hard to keep fighting when the odds felt so stacked against them, but Kora knew they couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the Xanthe had shown they could bleed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kora gathered her team. They stood in a tight circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a small fire. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood, the crackling flames dancing in their eyes. But there was no comfort in the warmth. There was only purpose. "This is what we've trained for," Kora said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of leadership. "Tonight, we show the Xanthe that they've made a mistake. They think we're weak. They think we'll break. We won't." She turned to her team, her gaze locking with each one of them. "We fight smart. We fight together. And when they come for us, we make them wish they had never set foot on this planet." A murmur of agreement passed through the group, each member nodding with a grim determination. Kora could see it in their eyes. They were ready to follow her into the depths of hell if it meant they could take the fight to the Xanthe. With a final nod, Kora turned in motion for them to fall in line. The jungle was their battleground, and it was time to begin the hunt. The attack was swift. Kora's rebels moved with precision, using the night's cover to their advantage. The Xanthe were still recovering from the ambush earlier, their forces scattered and disorganized. That was Kora's window. She moved silently through the shadows, leading her team toward the supply depot they had been watching for days. It wasn't long before they reached the clearing. The Xanthe had set up a defensive perimeter, but it was hasty, too focused on guarding their convoy route. They hadn't expected an attack so soon. "Position yourselves," Kora whispered, pointing to the trees surrounding the depot. "Zane, take the right flank. I'll handle the front." Zane nodded, sliding into the foliage without a sound. The rebels spread out, their movements fluid, practiced. Kora took her position, watching the Xanthe patrol the perimeter. They were alert, but not enough. They were still overconfident. A single shot rang out, breaking the silence. The first Xanthe soldier fell, a burst of blood staining the ground. The battle had begun. Kora's team moved quickly, their weapons silent but deadly. They took out the guards with surgical precision, their movements fluid and coordinated. The Xanthe tried to regroup, but Kora's rebels were already inside the compound, setting explosives on their equipment, taking out key targets. But just as Kora thought they had the upper hand, a new threat emerged. A larger Xanthe squad appeared from the trees, heavily armored and heavily armed. They were the shock troops, the ones Kora had been hoping to avoid. "Fall back!" Kora shouted, her mind racing. There was no time to regroup. They had to leave, or they would be wiped out. "Retreat! Now!" The rebels hesitated, some of them frozen in place. They had expected a victory, but now they were facing the full force of the Xanthe. Zane, who had been closest to the line of fire, grabbed Kora's arm and pulled her toward cover. "We can't hold them off." "Not like this." "We don't have to hold them off," Kora replied, her voice sharp. "We just need to make sure they know we'll never stop fighting." They retreated into the jungle, leaving behind the wreckage of the Xanthe supply depot. The explosions they had set would buy them time, but it wouldn't be long before the Xanthe mounted a counterattack. Kora's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve was unwavering. The rebels were shaken, but Kora knew they would recover. They had learned their lesson: fear was not something to be conquered. It was something to be used. And tonight, they had given the Xanthe a taste of it. As they melted back into the jungle, Kora whispered to herself, "They'll fear us. They have to." Kora stood at the edge of the clearing, her pulse rifle resting in her hands, her eyes scanning the horizon. The jungle around her felt unnaturally silent, as though the trees themselves held their breath. The Xanthe were coming. She could feel it in her bones. The calm before the storm always came with a chill. It had been 2 days since their last attack. The Xanthe had regrouped, and now, they were bringing everything they had left. Kora had expected this. She had prepared for it. But that didn't mean she was ready for what was coming. She'd seen enough battles to know that sometimes, no amount of preparation would be enough. Still, there was no turning back now. The human resistance had only a handful of fighters left, and Kora knew the odds were slim. But there was one thing the Xanthe didn't understand: how far a cornered animal would go to survive. How far she would go. "Zane," she called over her shoulder, her voice steady but sharp. "Are the charges set?" Zane appeared beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his hands steady as he adjusted the detonators. "All set, Kora. The perimeter's rigged. We've got one shot at this. We either break them now, or we die trying." Kora nodded, her jaw clenched. "No one's dying today," she said, more to herself than to Zane. "Not if I can help it." The rebel leader turned to face the rest of the team, who had gathered around the base of a massive tree. They were tired, their faces covered in dirt, their eyes weary. But there was no fear in them. Not anymore. Fear had become something else, a weapon, something to wield against their enemies. They weren't the hunted anymore. They were the hunters. "Listen up," Kora said, her voice cutting through the air. "We're not running this time. We're standing our ground. We've got a limited window before they bring in the heavy artillery, so we hit hard, hit fast, and get the hell out before they realize we've done the damage." Her eyes scanned each face. Zane, his scarred face a mirror of her own determination. Lila, the sniper, who had once been a teacher before the invasion. Zoryn, the demolitions expert, his hands always a little too steady when the explosives came out. They were all different people, but they were united in one cause: survival. "We move out in 5, Kora added, turning on her heel. "Don't let them think we're weak. Don't let them think we'll break." As she moved to the front, her mind raced. She had planned every detail of this ambush meticulously, every twist and turn accounted for. But in the back of her mind, she knew the truth. This wasn't just about outsmarting the Xanthe. It was about proving something much deeper. It was about making them feel humanity's defiance, making them understand the price of underestimating the people they had thought to crush. The jungle whispered around them as they took their positions, each member of the team slipping into the dense underbrush. Kora found her spot, crouching low behind a boulder, her breathing slow and measured. The rest of the team spread out, preparing for the oncoming wave. She checked her rifle, ensuring the safety was off, her hands steady despite the tension that coiled in her stomach. It didn't take long for the Xanthe to appear. First came the hum of their transports, the unmistakable sound of their engines cutting through the jungle. Then the soldiers emerged, armored in their sleek, dark uniforms, their weapons raised as they scoured the area. Kora's heart thudded in her chest as the first group passed her position. She didn't make a sound, didn't even breathe. Her eyes flicked over the Xanthe, noting their formation, the gaps in their ranks. There. That was the weak point. She had them. "Now," she whispered into her comms, and her voice was like a spark in the night. The first explosion rocked the ground, followed by another and then another. The Xanthe soldiers scrambled, but it was too late. The rebels opened fire, precise, coordinated, the shots ringing out like clockwork. The Xanthe were caught off guard, their ranks thinning quickly. Kora moved forward, her rifle raised, firing into the chaos. Each shot found its mark, the crack of the pulse rifle punctuating the air. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear, focused. She was a machine, a force of nature. She was the thing they feared. But then the heavy artillery arrived. The ground trembled beneath her feet as massive Xanthe war machines, towering walkers equipped with devastating plasma cannons, emerged from the jungle. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy, and Kora's stomach sank. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't ready for the sheer scale of the assault. "Fall back!" Kora shouted, already retreating behind cover. "Everyone, fall back to the secondary position." Her rebels hesitated, their faces flashing with fear. But Kora's voice cut through the panic. "We stand, or we die. Do you want to be remembered as the ones who broke? Or the ones who made the Xanthe pay?" Her words had the intended effect. The rebels gathered themselves, pushing forward once more. The war machines opened fire, their plasma blasts lighting up the jungle in an explosion of blinding light. Kora's team scattered, but they didn't flee. They fought back. Lila, the sniper, perched high in the trees, picked off enemy commanders with deadly accuracy. Zoryn's charges erupted with force, tearing through the machine's legs, destabilizing them. Zane led a charge, moving in close to disable the smaller Xanthe units, using guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver the larger forces. Kora's eyes locked onto the largest war machine, the one leading the charge. It was moving toward her position, its massive cannon aimed at the heart of the rebel resistance. She had no time to hesitate. With a swift motion, Kora stood, aimed, and fired. The shot pierced the machine's weak spot, an exposed joint in its armor, and the machine staggered, its systems failing. The Xanthe soldiers, stunned by the sudden loss of their leader, faltered. That was all Kora needed. She sprang into action, leading the final charge, her team following her lead. The battle was fierce, but the tide had turned. The Xanthe had underestimated the humans. They had underestimated her. As the last of the Xanthe soldiers fled into the jungle, Kora stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily. The forest around her was eerily quiet now, save for the distant crackling of fires. Her team was battered, but alive. They had won. For now, at least. Kora turned to face them, her heart still pounding. "We've done it," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what they had just accomplished. But this is only the beginning. The jungle held its breath once more, but this time, Kora was ready. The Xanthe would return, but they would come with a new understanding. Humans were not weak. They were a force to be reckoned with. And Kora? She would make sure they never forgot that.